Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Human Risk podcast for 2020. And we're kicking the year off with a fascinating conversation with Roger Dooley. Now, Roger describes himself as a friction hunter, and he's been specialising in the topic of friction for a number of years. Now, friction is basically the thing that stops us from doing what it is we want or need to do. We've all come across it in our daily lives, whether it's bureaucratic, whether it's tedious processes we have to go through, or IT systems that don't respond in the way that we want them to. And what Roger explores in his new book and in the podcast is how we can think about friction, how we can seek to remove it, but also, counterintuitively, how we might sometimes seek to actively introduce it for good reason. I'm fascinated by the topic of friction, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Roger Dooley as much as I did having it. So, Roger, thank you so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to speak to you. Friction is a topic that's fascinated me for some time. And so I wondered, sort of start with, can you tell us how did you get into friction, if I can put it like that?
Right. Well, first, Christian, thanks for having me on your show. And it's great to be chatting with a fellow friction devotee, perhaps. My interest, I guess, started back a few years ago. I created a framework I called the Persuasion Slide, and it's for the behavioral science geeks and among our listeners. It is loosely based on B.J. Fogg's behavior model, but with some somewhat significant differences. And it involves motivating people to take an action, things that stop them from taking the action, which in this case would be friction, and as well as a trigger or a prompt. But to me, even though there are four elements in the framework, to me, I found friction to be the most interesting for several reasons. And in the physical world, friction, of course, is what stops the child partway down the slide when it's not slippery enough. And in my framework, it is difficulty or effort that prevents or even slows the customer or other persuasion target from getting to the bottom. But to me, increasing people's motivation can be difficult. If you have an e-commerce website, you can get more orders if you offer bigger discounts, if you offer free shipping, if you don't normally do that, if you throw in bonus products. But all those things cost a lot of money. And on the other hand, if you can simply make it easier for your customer to place the order or perform whatever other action you want, then that really costs you nothing, and it's a better experience for them. Amazon makes it super easy to order, and their customers are super loyal because of that. So that, to me, was the most interesting part of the framework. And as I started writing about it, more or less purely from a persuasion standpoint. But I realized how many areas of human behavior it affected, which is pretty much everything. Anything that involves effort changes the way people behave. So I looked at it first from a sort of sales standpoint. How can we get more business on our website or in our store? But then I looked at the friction internally and how it affects employee experience, because once you start looking for friction in the customer experience, inevitably you find it in the internal experience too. You see procedures and processes that are poorly designed that waste time. People become aware of the time they're wasting in either meetings or dealing with email, in which in either case isn't really essential. And once they see this friction in their own lives, they want to eliminate it because it's frustrating. And a recent Gallup survey showed that 85% of employees they surveyed were not engaged with their employer. They weren't fully engaged with their employer. So basically what that means is in the average business, at least in the U.S., the vast majority of people are really just sort of putting in their time. They, are maybe doing an okay job, but they aren't necessarily really bonded with the employer. They aren't necessarily putting out that extra effort that you'd hope. And customers, too, can sense that when they interact with customers. So it's, one way to change engagement is to eliminate all this friction in the employment process, in the employee process, and get rid of stuff that isn't important, that slows down their own work, and it'll improve their quality of life at the office, and it'll make them better people, better with customers, and more engaged with their employer.
That's fascinating. And one of the things I found myself doing as I was reading the book was sort of really nodding and recognizing this stuff is everywhere. And I just wondered, what are your thoughts on why this is so prevalent? Because once you point out that making something difficult means people are less likely to want to do it, it's sort of a statement of the obvious. And yet that seems to have been missed in the way that we have built structures and the way companies have organized themselves. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a few reasons, Christian. I think, you're right. It seems obvious. In fact, I was speaking at an entrepreneurial mastermind a few years ago, and they said, well, okay, what's the topic? They wanted me to share one topic before the event, like do a little video to promote the event. And I said, okay, well, now how about if I talk about friction? And I said, no, everybody knows about friction. You got to do something else. And, as I thought about that later, if everybody knows about friction, why do we encounter so much of it everywhere? And I think there are a few reasons. One is often it's accepted that it's just part of the process. In other words, people didn't think of a normal taxi experience as being high friction for years and years. Obviously, if you had a really bad situation where you were caught in traffic for 2 hours or your driver went to totally the wrong destination, you might say, okay, that was a pretty high friction experience. But this sort of a typical uneventful cab ride was okay. That was the way it was. You were happy that it was uneventful. But then Uber came along and took all of the friction out of the process, released a lot of the friction out of it, both from hailing the ride to begin with to communicating the destination, which you don't have to do if you've hailed an Uber and already programmed in your destination, and even to payment at the end. I travel in Europe quite a bit, and I still find a lot of situations where the traditional cab drivers are reluctant to use credit cards. They say that no, they don't have that, but they may reluctantly pull a machine out from under the front seat, establish an internet connection, and then process your card. This can take minutes of both of your time. When in an Uber, you get to your destination and you say goodbye, thank you, and you're done. And once we saw how easy it could be, then we see the friction in the original process that before was more or less invisible. And I think the other reason we see so much of it is because there are constraints that are believed to be unchangeable. In other words, I am a frequent flyer on United Airlines. I use their website a lot, and their user experience is really quite high friction. One of the things that makes me absolutely crazy is, first of all, they log you out after, 15 minutes or 20 minutes or something. So if you're involved in some complex reservation process where you're juggling hotels and meeting times and other schedules, it's easy to have your flight window open one place, and then by the time you get back, you've got to start over again because it logged you out, which I would point out has never happened to me at Amazon. Amazon never logs you out after 10 or 20 minutes. They also fail to recognize my computer that I've had for 6 years now. They don't go back to their website, and after a few days, suddenly, hey, we don't recognize your device. And they start asking questions about, what's your best friend's birthday? What kind of books do you read? And I got to remember, how did I answer those questions? The only thing I would say is that now I tend to remember those answers because I'm having to answer them all the time, which is right. Which is wrong. Again, that never happens at Amazon. But this experience has been dictated by some folks in their security department, and it's considered to be immutable. Like, okay, well, this is the way it's got to be. When in fact, it does not have to be that way. There are other businesses who have similar risk profiles to United Airlines who do not put you through all those hoops. But I think what I've observed, Christian, is once a site or a business gets hacked, suddenly the security people are ascendant in the organization, and they pretty much call the shots. And unless those people responsible for customer experience or employee experience really push back on it, it just ends up being a bad experience.
And I think that's sort of fascinating. I'm smiling as you were talking because thank goodness you were talking about information security as opposed to sort of compliance, which is my background. But it's the same thing. It's somebody's coming in and the user experience is kind of pushed to the back as something else takes precedence. And I think you're sort of highlighting of the fact it's technologically possible and it must be feasible to manage the risk. Yet people cling to these arcane systems, even when the technology clearly permits a different approach.
Right. Well, talking about compliance, Christian, I think if you look at the user experience at some sort of traditional financial sites and some of the newer fintech sites, you can see how the newer businesses have often sort of Uberized, if you will, the experience. I know a couple of years ago, I was working on a consulting project for a really huge financial company. And I think they were, what they wanted me to focus on was, okay, how can we use behavioral science to improve conversion on our, the products on our website? And I looked at their website and said, my first reaction was, these guys don't need, a behavioral science expert. They need a user experience person because this is horrible.
Right.
They had giant disclaimers that undoubtedly, they felt were legally required. But, in pretty much big black type, that was the thing that caught your eye when you went to the page. And anybody looking at that would be scared to death if they decided to read it, of all the things that they were disclaiming, where, other companies have to abide by those same rules, but they know how to present that information in a way that is not as visually distracting, does not interfere with the user or customer experience, but still keeps the company legally compliant.
Right, and I think it's almost lazy thinking, it seems to me. So it sort of becomes frictionless for whoever's driving the agenda, but frictionful for the end user, which clearly can't be the right outcome in a business context.
Well, it's laziness overall, Christian. I've used Amazon a lot as an example, both in my book and in my speeches and such, because they have had a focus on friction for decades. Back in 1997, Jeff Bezos was talking about frictionless shopping, when most people are just talking about online shopping, and he already saw the potential to take the friction out of the process. The year after, they patented one-click ordering, and it seemed like a kind of a dumb patent to me at the time. So I said, this can't be real. But not only was it real, they spent millions of dollars to defend that in court, and the only result of that was that all of their competition, initially Barnes & Noble, but other companies as well, had to add a single click to their ordering process. So like Barnes & Noble had to add a confirm order click after the one-click button that they originally had. But Amazon saw that small difference in friction, that little bit of user effort, as being worth defending to the death. And at the same time, Steve Jobs was just opening their music store, the iTunes store. He saw one-click ordering, and he didn't mess around. He just said, I want it, and he paid Amazon $1 million to be able to use it in his store. And we all know how that turned out very well. So, this even little bits of effort can be really, really important.
I must admit, that had astonished me in the book. And I think when one starts to think about the importance of that process, I think it's clearly a key driver of Amazon's success and is indicative of a much broader customer-friendly approach. Reading the book, there were so many sort of fascinating stories, and I'd love to go through more of them with you. But there was one that really shone out to me, which was this story of the lady in the Netherlands who was officially...
Oh, Esther Jacobs,
yeah, who was knighted age 33 for this amazing piece, and then suffered a sort of Kafkaesque bureaucratic hell. Can you just talk a little bit about her? Because I think that's
this was one of the most hilarious experiences I've had. I've been lucky enough to have her on my podcast, and I've corresponded with her, and she's really an amazing person. But she, at a very young age, collected millions of dollars for charity via a novel way that people can Google if they want, and was then proceeded to demand accountability on the part of the organizations that she was funding with that, which is kind of a novel concept, at least in the EU, I guess. In the US, there are quite a few regulations about disclosure of how you use your funds, but I guess at least at the time, that was not the case in the EU. So as a result of both of those efforts, she was knighted by the Queen of the Netherlands, which is a pretty amazing honor. But a few years later, she was sort of living the life of a digital nomad, traveling to different countries and working remotely. And she owned a house in the Netherlands, and she considered herself totally a Netherlands citizen, a Dutch citizen. She went home to renew her passport, and they said, "Oh, well, we can't do this because you don't live here." And it was because she had not resided for a few months continuously in her hometown, which they were able to demonstrate, I guess, by her passport stamps or something. And so I said, no, we can't do this. And they insisted that she wasn't. And she ended up losing, first her parking permit, which doesn't sound too bad, but eventually her business permit, her phone service, just about everything that she had, everything official that she had in her hometown and in her home country. But she said that there was only one government entity that still recognized her as a citizen, and that was the tax bureau, where they were happy to tax her income as a citizen, but nobody else felt she was. And it was this crazy situation. She contacted ministers because she was kind of a visible person because of her status, and she was a prominent blogger as well. They agreed, this wasn't what the law was meant to do, but they, after meeting, really couldn't figure out a way around it, and so nothing happened. And finally, she developed some bizarre workaround where she moved to Andorra. That allowed her to keep her Dutch citizenship, although 5 years later, oddly enough, and this part isn't in the book, when she went to renew her driver's license, the whole cycle started over again, where they said, no, you need a residence card. And well, no, you can't renew your driver's license because you don't live here. And it just began the whole mess again. It's just insane. And it is Kafkaesque. In fact, there is something called the Kafka Brigade, which is sort of a loose organization of mostly volunteers who try and help citizens through this, through baffling government processes. They even got involved and weren't necessarily able to solve her problem. But it is truly crazy. And, the Dutch economy is not that bad, but chances are it could be a lot better. If you look at some of the international metrics like the ease of doing business rating, they do not do very well. In fact, I've had a couple of authors on my podcast, they did published a comparison of Holland versus Belgium. And I think they called it the Business World Cup or something like that, just to sort of, and they compared the processes involved to start a business, and things that could be done in Belgium in a day or two would take months or even more than a year in Holland. And, when you add that kind of friction to a process, inevitably you get less of it. Jeff Bezos, my favorite quote, I think, that I almost put on the cover of the book was from Jeff Bezos, who said, if you reduce friction, if you make something easy, you will get more of it. And that is, exactly what happens with business. If you make it really easy to start businesses, you get more startups. And it can have a dramatic impact, particularly when it is really endemic in the system. And in the book, I talk about the difference between India and China. Not that China is an easy place to do business, but under certain circumstances, things can move very quickly there, where in India, basically for years, nothing moved very quickly. And as a result, China's economy grew to 8 times the size of India's over 30 years, which when at the outset, it would have appeared that India had the advantage, having a perhaps better educated population, a larger English-speaking population, which is the language of commerce around the world, and a legal system inherited from Great Britain, which was both a good thing because there is rule of law, but also a bad thing because they sort of, it ended up being an endless bureaucracy that slowed everything down.
Well, as someone that regularly experiences the UK government at its finest and its worst, I can confirm that there are definite disadvantages to that. Fascinating stuff. And what I really liked about the Esther Jacobs story was, I think that the little anecdote about the tax department being the only one that recognized us sort of illustrates that when governments want you to do something, i.e. pay tax or not receive a service, they're very good at switching on or switching off friction.
Right.
And it's sort of, there seems to be a massive inconsistency where if it's in their interest to get you to be able to do something, it happens really simply. And we've seen lots of, the benefit system here in the UK, for example. If one was cynically minded, and of course I am, one could say that it was set up to make it really hard to claim benefit.
Right. And, perhaps so. Oftentimes, though, I think even well-meaning bureaucrats wonder, gee, why aren't more people accessing this great benefit that we're providing? But if you look at the process for accessing it, it's really difficult. There's long forms to fill out. There are approvals and delays and, all kinds of, maybe you have to go to a particular office or something to make something happen. And all of these things make it far more difficult. And if it's more difficult, you will have fewer people doing it.
And I guess that sort of takes me on to the final bit that I wanted to pick up with you was really looking around. I mean, friction we can point as a bad thing, but you pick up in your book that it can also be a good thing. And certainly when one looks at a lot of compliance processes, for example, there are valid reasons why one might wish to slow people down and make things a little bit harder. So whether that's an activity that you don't want them to do or you want them to think about it before they do something, what are your views on that and sort of good uses of friction?
I think it is, friction can be a tool. And the reason I did not name the book Frictionless, as a few smart people suggested to me, was because I see the duality in friction, that most of the time it's bad, but there are times when you can use it productively to steer behavior. And some businesses have gone to extremes in doing this by making it very easy, say, to sign up for a trial subscription to a publication, but then making it very difficult to turn that off. And I think I just saw someone mentioned the Guardian had a practice like that where to unsubscribe or to turn off your automatic renewal of subscription, you have to locate a phone number, call in during business hours to do that, where obviously you can sign up for free with a few clicks. So, I mean, that to me, that is approaching what they call a dark pattern in the user experience space, where you are deliberately disadvantaging your customers or other people for your own benefit. But I think there's some much more positive uses of it too. One of the reasons Richard Thaler won his Nobel Prize was showing that you could get more people to sign up for retirement plans at businesses if they were automatically opted in and had to opt out instead of the reverse. And the simple act of doing that really increased the number of people. And he had some additions that could also increase the amount saved per year and so on. But it was all by making it automatic and easy, no effort to do it. People wanted to be part of it, but if you had to fill out a form, there's who likes to fill out forms, right? It's time consuming, and there's always something better to do right now. And then, we missed the deadline for that. Oh well. So that was the first insight. But much later, I saw a different study where a company wanted to reduce the number of people who were taking money out of their retirement plan because this was a problem. They had made it very easy to access, which is nice. So if you needed some money to purchase a car or to take care of a medical bill or something, you could just call up the HR department and tell them what you needed, and a check would be issued. So what they did was instead say, okay, if you want to withdraw money, you simply have to fill out this form. They did not make it difficult. It wasn't like a crazy long form, and there were no particular restrictions that you can only do this on the third Tuesday of the month. But you simply have to fill out this piece of paper to get it. And what they found was even just that little bit of friction ended up changing behavior somewhat, and fewer people were taking money out of their retirement account for purposes other than retirement, which is really what you don't want people withdrawing except under really extreme financial circumstances where it's necessary. And it's not supposed to be a piggy bank or a bank savings account, but some people used it that way, and this actually changed their behavior. So in that case, adding friction helped. I'll give you one more example, and that's from Uber. Uber, of course, has this thing called surge pricing, where it's designed to bring more drivers out when there's a lot of demand. So if you get maybe a big event happening, or if it is a rainy afternoon in Manhattan or London, perhaps, it's difficult to find a cab. And it's difficult. So there's more demand because people aren't going to walk. They want to ride. So using surge pricing, they charge a higher price to their riders and pass most of that through, or some of it through at least, depending on who you listen to the driver. And that brings more drivers out who might have been sitting watching television, but no, hey, wow, we're in surge mode. In fact, I remember in one city, I had a driver who said he only came out in surge mode. That's the only time he drove. So it was having a positive behavioral effect there. But occasionally, people would be upset when they got their bill because they're used to a certain trip costing them a certain amount. And when it ends up being twice that amount, suddenly they get upset saying, well, hey, what's going on here? And, the justification is, well, gee, you did see the price quote, but obviously the customer had not fully processed that information. They just requested the ride without really looking at it, not seeing that the ride was going to cost twice as much. So what Uber did was add just a little bit of friction to that process where it was confirmed surge pricing. And that slowed their customers down just enough to take a look at it and sort of internalize the fact, okay, well, yeah, okay, this is going to cost me twice as much, but that's okay. And the complaints about surge pricing went down dramatically after that. So a little bit of friction, yes, their process is almost frictionless, but adding that little bit of friction ended up with a higher level of customer satisfaction.
And I think that's a lovely example of a company that sort of has shifted from making everything frictionless to recognizing that there are times when that can be intelligently deployed. It's actually in the customer's interest. And I think that sort of flexibility around it, I think, is a very key skill set as one looks at these pieces, totally frictionless, not good, massively frictionful, not good. And there's a nice balance in what you've described.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's, we think of them as friction eliminators, but actually we would call them friction engineers.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Final question for you is, obviously you are very alive to friction wherever it appears, both in your own life and sort of as situations you see around you. What would your tips be for people for sort of identifying and dealing with friction?
I think that once you start seeing it, you won't stop. So obviously reading my book is one way to sort of sensitize yourself to it. But I think if you just look for friction in your daily life, and when you encounter it or within what your customers are experiencing, experiencing, record it in some way. Keep a friction journal, put it into Evernote if that's your particular tool of choice. Perhaps take a screen grab. I know the desktop of my Mac is littered with screen grabs. Every time I encounter a high friction experience on the web, I capture it and it falls there. And then occasionally I go back and look at these, both just to amuse myself, but also then I may post them on social media. I may use them for a blog post or something else. And when you do that, it sensitizes you to seeing it more and more. And there's actually a neuroscientific reason for that, Christian. Our brains have what's called the reticular activating system. And your RAS is in essence a filter that screens out everything your brain does not need to pay attention to at a particular moment. And for example, if you are crossing the street in Times Square, your RAS will filter out everything except the crosswalk indicator, oncoming cars, and the pedestrians right around you. Because otherwise you'd be paralyzed. You'd have thousands and thousands of inputs in your brain and you wouldn't have a clue as to what to do. And so it's a valuable tool. And probably all of our listeners have had their own RAS experience. If they've ever purchased a new car and within a week or two of that purchase, they start seeing cars that look like theirs everywhere, same models, even same color in some cases. So, where are all these cars? I never saw one before this. Those cars were always there, but they were filtered out by your RAS. But now that that's your car, your RAS says, that might be important, and it lets it through. So what happens with friction is, and this is what I call my metaphorical friction goggles, once you start seeing it and paying attention to it, you're really training your RAS to see it, see more of it. So, if you're in a process like the taxi experience of, say, the pre-Uber taxi experience, maybe you would see some of that friction that normally you would have just taken for granted. And to me, that's the benefit of focusing on it, because once you see it, then you can start trying to do something about it. Now, it can be kind of frustrating if it's outside your control. If you're experiencing this friction from a government agency, then, you may feel that there's nothing you can do about that, and perhaps you can't. But to me, I like to give the people who go to my speeches, and we'll do that to our listeners here too today, permission to push back when they see bad user experience or bad customer experience, to push back if it's in their own organization, to use those appropriate internal approaches to highlight that and point out how it could be better. And if it's someone else's thing entirely, another company, perhaps a website that you visit, expose them on the web. I even created a little hashtag friction hunter to promote that concept of when people identify friction that shouldn't be there, to highlight it. So, I think that is, once you start doing that, you're going to see it more and more. And then the other thing, I think, where some pushback is required, often people are in organizations where somebody else is calling these shots, whether it's a compliance department, and I know maybe not all of our listeners will appreciate this, but or the IT department or security people, and they are putting down rules that will dictate what the customer experience is like. It's important to push back against that if it's really going to damage the customer experience, and try and find a solution that works for both. Amazon is a great example. I often joke that you are always logged in Amazon. You'd have to buy a new computer to get logged out of Amazon. And it seems like that's true, because 98% of the things you want to do on their website, you can do without having to re-log in or re-authenticate yourself. You can always go to their site, and it's always going to say, "Hi, Roger," if your name is Roger, like mine is. And they never challenge you saying, "Hey, we don't recognize you. Let's start talking about your friends' birthdays and such." They make that super easy. And you can shop. You can look at products. You can put products in your cart. You can use the one-click ordering button. You can do just about everything without having to go through any kind of re-authentication process. But if you, decide to send gift cards to other people, if you decide to ship something to an address you've never shipped to before, then they will ask you to re-log in or to re-enter your credit card number. Neither particularly effortful, but they do have protections in place. It's just that most businesses are too lazy to do that. Instead, there's a one-size-fits-all approach that you are either logged in and you can do absolutely anything, or you are logged out and you can do nothing. And because since you can do anything if you're logged in, we're also going to we're going to log you out periodically. We're going to make sure that if somebody comes in from a new device, that it's a difficult authentication, instead of reserving that more onerous authentication process only for risky activities. And to me, that's laziness, but there's a lot of that on the web and in our daily lives.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end on. I think one thing I've taken away is when I read your book is it doesn't have to be like that. And having the goggles that you give people as they, as you take them through this journey, I think is fascinating. It certainly changed the way I look at a heck of a lot of things. So the book comes thoroughly recommended from me. It's Friction by Roger Dooley. And Roger, you've also got a podcast. How can people find that?
The best place to find me, my podcast, my blog posts, and everything else is rogerdooley.com. And that's a good jumping off point to both my own blogs, my blog at Forbes, and pretty much everything Roger Dooley, including my social media profiles. On social media, I'm probably easiest to find on Twitter, where I am at Roger Dooley, but I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook.
Excellent. Well, I'll put some links up to all your various presences so people can find that. But thank you so much, It's been an absolute pleasure. I enjoyed the book, but I enjoyed the conversation even more. So thank you for sparing the time.
It's been a lot of fun, Christian. Thank you.
So that's it for another edition of the Human Risk Podcast. My thanks to you for listening and to Roger for appearing. If you want to find out more about Roger's work and to read more about his book, go to rogerdooley.com. And if you're not already subscribed to this Human Risk Podcast, you'll find it wherever you get your quality audio content. Equally, if you're interested in the sorts of topics that we've covered here, don't forget the Human Risk newsletter and the Human Risk video channel. Both of those you can find at human-risk.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here again for another edition of the Human Risk Podcast